In December 1963, a 17-year-old high school student in San Diego decided he was going to stay awake. Not for a night, not for a weekend. He wanted to break the world record. His name was Randy Gardner. For the first 2 days it was easy. Coffee, music, friends keeping him company in shifts. By day 3, his eyes started doing something strange. They would track an object across the room and then, for half a second, just stop, like a camera buffering. By day 4, he couldn't remember what he'd said 30 seconds earlier. By day 7, he was hallucinating. A street sign became a person. A wall began breathing. He looked at his own hand and didn't recognize it as his. By day 9, he could no longer finish a sentence. By day 11, 264 hours with his eyes open, he sat in front of a researcher who asked him to count backward from 100 by sevens. He started. He got to 93, then he stopped. And he just sat there, staring. He had forgotten what he was doing. He had forgotten the task while he was doing it. This is what happens to a human brain when you take away the one thing it needs more than food, more than water, more than warmth. And here is the part that should stop you cold. You will spend roughly 30 years of your life doing exactly what Randy Gardner was trying not to do. Lying still, eyes closed, gone. 30 years. More than you'll spend at work, more than you'll spend with the people you love, more than you'll spend doing anything you would actually call living. And science, after 150 years of trying, still cannot tell you with certainty why. Block 2. For most of human history, the answer seemed obvious. Sleep is rest. The body works all day, the body needs to recover, so it shuts down at night and recharges. Aristotle said it. Your grandmother said it. Every doctor for the last 2,000 years said it. It is the most intuitive idea in biology. And it is wrong. Not slightly wrong, not refined over time. Wrong in a way that, when scientists finally figured it out, forced them to throw away almost everything they thought they knew about what happens behind your closed eyelids. Because here is what we actually know now. When you fall asleep, your brain does not slow down. In some regions, it speeds up. It generates electrical waves more powerful than anything it produces while you're awake. It runs simulations. It replays your day at high speed. It rewires connections. It floods itself with fluid and physically washes out toxins that would otherwise kill it. Your brain at night is not resting. It is doing work it cannot do during the day. Work so important that if you stop it, even for a few nights, your immune system collapses, your memory dissolves, your emotions destabilize, and your organs begin to fail. So here is the question this video is going to answer. If sleep isn't rest, then what is it? And why does evolution force every living creature on this planet for hundreds of millions of years to do it every single night for a third of its life with its eyes closed and its body completely defenseless? Because whatever the answer is, it has to be big enough to justify the most dangerous habit in the history of life on Earth. 3. To understand why we got it so wrong for so long, you have to understand how reasonable the wrong answer was. Around 350 BC, Aristotle wrote one of the first non-mystical explanations of sleep in human history. Before him, sleep was the work of gods. The Egyptians called it the little death, a state in which the soul temporarily left the body. The Greeks made the god of sleep Hypnos and the god of death Thanatos twin brothers. Same mother, same threshold. That intuition was so strong it appeared independently across cultures. Sumerian, Aztec, ancient Indian. Something in a human being watching another human being sleep felt wrong. He's gone. He left. Where? Aristotle wanted out of the mysticism. He proposed something physical instead. When you eat, he said, warm vapors rise from the stomach to the head. There, in the cooler region of the skull, they condense, grow heavy, and sink back down toward the heart. That cooling, that downward flow, is what causes sleep. The mechanics are completely wrong. Vapours do not rise from your dinner to your skull. But underneath the wrong mechanics was an idea that turned out to be astonishingly durable. Aristotle proposed that during the day the body spends some resource, some essence, and at night that resource is replenished. The restorative theory of sleep. It has not died in 2,400 years. The Middle Ages added nothing. Sleep remained either a gift from God or a trick of the devil. Nightmares, literally nightmares from the Old Norse, were believed to be creatures that sat on the chest of a sleeper and suffocated him. That's where the word comes from in most European languages, not a metaphor, a description of what people genuinely believed was happening to them every night. The Enlightenment changed the angle, but not the conclusion. By the 18th and 19th centuries, doctors and physiologists had moved past demons and vapours, but the underlying picture stayed the same. Sleep is what happens when the body stops. Two theories dominated. The first was called the passive theory. Sleep happens, it said, because the brain stops receiving input. Eyes close, the room goes quiet, sensory signals drop off. The brain, with nothing to do, simply switches off, like a light bulb when you flip the switch. The second was about blood. Scientists in the 19th century proposed that during sleep, blood drains away from the brain. Without enough blood, the brain quiets down. Activity falls. The person loses consciousness. And the evidence seemed to fit. Brain temperature does drop slightly during sleep. The pulse does slow. Breathing deepens. The brain looked, to every measurement available at the time, like an engine winding down for the night. By 1920, this was the consensus. Sleep is the absence of wakefulness. The brain is a lamp. At night, somebody pulls the cord. Hold that picture in your head, because in 1924, a man in Germany was about to attach 2 pieces of wire to a patient's scalp, and everything you just heard was about to fall apart. Block 4. His name was Hans Berger. He was a German psychiatrist working in the city of Jena, and he had spent most of his career chasing something almost no one took seriously. He believed the human brain produced electricity, not metaphorically, literally. Measurable electrical current, the kind you could record with a wire and a galvanometer. Other scientists thought he was a crank. The brain was tissue. Tissue did not generate signals you could read from outside the skull. Berger kept going anyway, for years. Quietly, mostly alone. In 1924, he attached 2 electrodes to the scalp of a patient, connected them to a recording device, and watched a needle scratch a line onto paper. The line wasn't flat, it moved, in rhythms, steady, repeating waves of electrical activity, picked up through bone and skin from a brain that was supposed to be just a piece of meat. Berger had invented the electroencephalogram, the EEG. When he published his results, almost no one believed him. The findings were too strange. It took several years before other laboratories repeated the experiment and confirmed what he'd seen. But once they did, the picture of sleep that had stood for 2,000 years began to crack. Because here is what the EEG showed. When a person is awake and thinking, the brain produces fast, irregular, low-amplitude waves. Lots of small ripples, no clear rhythm. The signature of a system doing many small things at once. When that same person falls asleep, you would expect the waves to fade, to flatten, to wind down towards zero, like an engine cooling off. That's not what happens. The waves get bigger, slower, more organized. Massive, synchronized pulses rolling across the entire surface of the brain in unison. Some of them stronger than anything the awake brain produces. The sleeping brain wasn't going dark. It was switching into a different mode of operation. Larger, more coordinated, more powerful in some measurable senses than the waking one. This was a problem. If sleep is the brain shutting down, why is it generating signals this strong? If blood is draining from the brain, why are some regions more active at night than during the day? If the brain is a lamp and someone pulls the cord, why does the lamp, the moment you stop looking, start producing more light than it did before? Something was deeply wrong with the official story. And then, 2 decades after Berger, a graduate student in Chicago was about to find something even stranger. He was about to watch a sleeping man's eyes start moving, fast, sharp, in every direction, while the rest of his body lay completely still. And when he woke the man up, the man would tell him he had been dreaming. Block 5, Loop 1. The graduate student's name was Eugene Aserinsky. The year was 1953. The lab belonged to Nathaniel Kleitman at the University of Chicago, and Aserinsky had been given what looked like the most boring assignment in the building. Watch sleeping children, track their eye movements, write it down. He was hooking electrodes to the scalps of his subjects, and also placing small sensors near the eyes to catch any motion under the closed lids. For most of the night, the readings were exactly what you'd expect. Slow waves, quiet activity, stillness. And then, hours into the recording, the machine went insane. The pen began jumping across the paper, fast, sharp bursts of activity. The eyes under the closed lids were moving violently, darting back and forth, up and down, as if the sleeper were watching something happen right in front of him. At the same time, the brainwaves shifted. They lost their slow, heavy rhythm and became fast, irregular, low amplitude, identical to the waves of a person who is wide awake. Aserinsky thought the equipment was broken. He checked the wires, he restarted the machine. The signal stayed the same. So he did the only thing left to do. He woke the sleeper up. And the sleeper said he had been dreaming. Vividly, in detail. A whole story playing out in his head, right up to the moment Aserinsky's hand touched his shoulder. Aserinsky did it again, and again. Every time he caught the eyes moving, he woke the subject. Every time the subject described a dream. Every time the eyes were still, the subject either remembered nothing or remembered something vague and broken. This was not a malfunction. This was a discovery. He and Kleitman published the result in the journal Science. They called the state REM, Rapid Eye Movement Sleep. And in a single paper, they broke the picture of sleep that had stood since Aristotle. Sleep was not one thing. It was at least 2 things. 2 completely different states, each with its own brain pattern, its own physiology, its own purpose, cycling through every single night while you lay there thinking nothing was happening. A few years later, a French neuroscientist named Michel Jouvet made the next move. He was studying cats, and he noticed something Aserinsky had missed. During REM sleep, when the brain looked exactly as active as it did during waking life, the body did the opposite. The muscles went completely limp, paralyzed. The cat's brain was firing as if it were hunting, but the cat itself could not move a paw. Jouvet called this paradoxical sleep, the body asleep, the brain awake. Something so intense was happening inside that the body had to be locked down to keep it from acting it out. Then Jouvet did the experiment that proved he was right. He removed, in a group of cats, the small region of the brainstem responsible for that paralysis. He let them sleep normally otherwise. He watched. And the cats, in the middle of REM sleep, with their eyes closed, began to move. They stalked, they pounced, they hissed at things that weren't there. They fought invisible enemies. They groomed invisible kittens. Their bodies were performing in perfect detail the contents of their dreams. It happens in humans too. The condition is called REM sleep behavior disorder. People with it physically act out their dreams. They scream, they throw punches, they jump out of bed. They have hurt themselves. They have hurt the people sleeping next to them. The brain dreams, the body executes. The wall between the 2 worlds disappears. Which raises the question Jouvet's cats forced everyone to confront. Why does the brain need that wall at all? Why is it generating something so vivid, so motor, so real, that the body has to be chemically pinned down to keep from acting it out? What is the brain actually doing inside a dream? To answer that, we need to back up, because Aserinsky's discovery was a turning point, but it wasn't the first time someone had proven that sleep was something the body could not live without. 60 years earlier, in Russia, a woman had already done the experiment that should have changed everything. And the way she did it is the hardest part of this story to hear. Her name was Marie de Manassine. She was one of the first women to work as a research physiologist in the Russian Empire, and in the 1880s she was trying to answer a question no one had answered before. What kills you first? Hunger, thirst, or no sleep? She knew the numbers on the first two. A person can live on average about 3 days without water, several weeks without food. The body burns through reserves, slowly, in a way the science of the time could measure. But sleep, nobody knew. Nobody had run the experiment. So she ran it. She took a litter of puppies. She kept them gently, constantly stimulated, so that they could not fall asleep. She did not starve them, she did not hurt them, she just kept them awake. They died in 4 to 5 days, faster than starvation, faster than thirst would have killed an adult dog. The puppies were given food and water the entire time. It did not save them. When she examined the bodies, she found something that did not fit the picture anyone had of sleep at the time. The damage wasn't mainly in the brain. The brain looked, by the standards of the era, almost normal. The destruction was everywhere else. The lining of the stomach, the intestines, the blood vessels. The internal organs were breaking down from the inside. Sleep was not just something the brain needed. Sleep was something the entire body needed. And without it, the body did not slow down. It tore itself apart. Her experiment was published in 1894. It should have changed the field overnight. It did not. Most physiologists ignored it. Some dismissed it. The woman who had run the first lethal sleep deprivation study in history was largely forgotten for almost 100 years. But the experiment was real. It has been repeated on rats decades later with the same result. Animals deprived of sleep completely do not last, 2 to 3 weeks at most. The bodies fail in the same pattern Manassine had seen: organ damage, ulceration of the gut, systemic collapse. In some cases, the gut bacteria, which normally live peacefully in the intestines, cross into the bloodstream and begin attacking the body from inside. The immune system, deprived of sleep, can no longer tell friend from invader. A body without sleep eats itself. So now the picture is darker and sharper than the one we started with. Sleep is not rest. Sleep is something so deeply wired into the architecture of living things that removing it kills them faster than starvation. The brain in sleep is not quiet. It is louder than during the day. There are at least 2 completely different sleep states, REM and the slower, deeper kind, and they cycle through every single night in everyone. And inside one of them, the brain is generating something so intense that the body has to be paralyzed to contain it. We still don't know why. What we are about to find out is what the brain is actually doing in there. Because once neuroscientists got better tools, once they could see inside the sleeping brain in real time, they discovered that it wasn't just active, it was working on specific tasks. Tasks it could not, would not perform during the day. And the first one they uncovered is the one closest to who you are, your memory. To understand what the brain is doing with your memory at night, you have to picture a night of sleep correctly. Not as one long blackout, as a journey, a cycle that repeats 4 to 6 times before you wake up, each one lasting roughly 90 minutes. Each one taking you down into the deep and back up to the surface. When you first close your eyes, you don't fall straight down. You drift. Light sleep. You can still hear sounds. A door closing can still wake you. Then the brainwaves begin to slow. Slower. Slower still. And you drop into the deepest cave of the cycle, the slow wave sleep, where the brain produces those massive synchronized pulses we talked about, delta waves, the slowest, widest, most powerful electrical rhythms a human brain can produce. Imagine ocean swells in a storm, not small ripples, huge, dark walls of water rolling from horizon to shore, slow and unstoppable. That is what is happening inside your skull in the deepest part of sleep. Then, just when it seems the brain has gone as quiet as it can go, it climbs back up. The waves shift. The eyes start moving under the lids. REM sleep begins. A dream begins. And then you drop again. Back into the depths. Another cycle. In the first half of the night, those cycles are heavy with slow wave sleep. In the second half, REM grows longer, dreams grow more vivid, and the most intense ones come right before you wake up. This is why, when you sleep only 5 or 6 hours instead of 8, you don't lose a flat slice of rest. You lose specifically the part of the night where the most important work gets done. For decades, no one knew what that work was. Then, in the late 1990s, 2 neuroscientists at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology decided to find out. Matthew Wilson and Bruce McNaughton. They were studying memory in rats, and they had access to a technology that had not existed in Manasseh's time, or Berger's, or Aserinsky's. They could implant electrodes so fine that they could record the firing of individual neurons in a living, behaving animal. They taught the rats to run a maze. As the rats explored, the scientists recorded which neurons in the hippocampus, the brain's memory center, fired and in what order. Each turn, each corner, each junction lit up a specific pattern of cells. A path through the maze created a signature in the brain, a sequence. Then they let the rats sleep, and they kept recording. What they saw is one of the most extraordinary discoveries in modern neuroscience. The same neurons, firing in the same order, while the rat was asleep. The brain was running the maze again, in the dark, with no maze present. Not slowly, not in real time, at high speed, compressed, like a tape on fast forward, played back over and over, while the rat's body lay still and its eyes were closed. The hippocampus, during slow-wave sleep, was rehearsing the day. Not metaphorically, literally. The exact neural pattern from the waking experience was being replayed, in sequence, hundreds of times in a single night. Something was being done to that pattern. Something the brain could not do while it was busy collecting new patterns. The day was for input, the night was for processing, and the processing turned out to be exactly what Aristotle had grasped at 2,400 years ago without knowing why. A resource was being managed, just not the kind he imagined. The resource was memory itself. Here is what we now know happens during slow-wave sleep. The hippocampus is a short-term storage system. It catches the experiences of the day, holds them and tags them. But it has limited capacity. If it just kept piling things in, it would fill up and stop working within hours. So at night, while you are unconscious, the hippocampus uses the delta waves as a signal. The signal means, roughly, the line is clear, send, and it begins transferring the day's memories in compressed bursts to the cortex, the much larger outer surface of the brain, where long-term memories are stored. It is doing the job of a courier, picking up packages from a small warehouse and delivering them to the address where they will live for the rest of your life. The slow waves are the road being cleared. The replay is the package being read one more time before it is filed. And without that process, the memory does not move. It stays in the hippocampus, fragile, fading, until the next day's experiences overwrite it. Which means, if you take away slow-wave sleep from a person who learned something new, they don't remember it less well. They don't remember it at all. This has been tested directly. You teach people a list of words, or a piano sequence, or a complex motor task. You measure how much they remember the same day. Then you split them into two groups. One group sleeps normally. The other group is selectively deprived of slow-wave sleep. They are allowed to sleep, but every time the EEG shows delta waves beginning to form, a researcher wakes them slightly, just enough to break the cycle, then lets them drift again. The next morning, both groups are tested. The sleep group remembers what they learned. The deprived group remembers almost nothing. Same hours in bed, same total time asleep. The only difference was whether the brain was allowed to do its night job. And without that job, the day before is mostly gone. Now think about what this means for something almost everyone has done at some point in their life. A student is preparing for an exam. The exam is tomorrow morning. He has not studied enough. So he makes the choice that feels like the brave one, the responsible one, the one that proves he is taking it seriously. He stays up. He drinks coffee. He pushes through the night with a textbook open. By morning, he is exhausted, but he has covered the material. He walks into the exam, and he remembers less than the student in the next seat who closed the book at midnight and went to bed. Not because he studied less, he studied more. He studied right up to the moment of the test. But the brain was never given the chance to do what the studying was for. The information went into the hippocampus and stayed there, unconsolidated, untransferred, fragile, and most of it dissolved before it could be filed. A night of cramming without sleep is like writing an important letter and then, instead of pressing send, pressing delete. The studying happened, the memory did not. This is not an exaggeration for emphasis. It is what the brain physically does and does not do depending on whether you sleep. And it gets stranger. Because slow-wave sleep doesn't just transfer memories, it chooses which ones to keep. In experiments where subjects learn many things in a day, some of which they are told will matter for a later test, and some of which they are told will not, the brain during sleep preferentially replays and consolidates the information tagged as important. The unimportant material fades. The important material strengthens. You sleep and a sorting happens. Your brain, in the dark, decides which parts of the day are worth keeping and which parts are noise. By morning, the version of yesterday that exists in your head has been edited, curated, compressed. The person who wakes up is not the person who went to bed. He is a slightly updated version, carrying a slightly different past, shaped by choices his sleeping brain made without asking him. That is what slow-wave sleep is doing, every night, in everyone. But this is still only one half of the night. The other half, the half full of dreams, is doing something different, something stranger, something that, when scientists finally figured it out, made them rethink not just memory, but emotion, trauma, and even where ideas come from. The brain doesn't just sort your day in your sleep, it also rewrites how you feel about it. If slow-wave sleep is the archivist, REM sleep is something harder to describe, something that, even now, scientists argue about. But the picture that has emerged in the last 20 years is the most coherent we have ever had. And it changes how you should think about every difficult thing that has ever happened to you. The neuroscientist most associated with this work is Matthew Walker at the University of California, Berkeley. He has spent his career asking a question that, on the surface, sounds almost too simple. Why do we dream? His answer is that REM sleep is a kind of overnight therapy, a session the brain conducts with itself, alone, in the dark, every night. And it works because of a very specific chemistry. During REM sleep, the emotional centers of the brain stay active. The amygdala, the small almond-shaped structure that drives fear and emotional reaction, is firing. The memory centers are firing. Images, faces, situations from the day are being pulled up and played back, often in distorted form, often woven together with older memories in ways that feel like nonsense. But one thing is missing: noradrenaline. Noradrenaline is the brain's stress chemical. It is the molecule that floods your system when you are afraid, when you are tense, when something is wrong. It is what makes a frightening memory feel frightening, not just remembered, but re-felt, in the body, with the pulse and the tight chest and the shallow breath. During REM sleep, and only during REM sleep, the brain produces almost none of it. The emotional content is there, the chemistry of fear is not, which creates a state that does not exist anywhere else in your life. You are revisiting your emotional memories without the emotional charge. And what the brain does in that state is strip the charge off. The memory stays, the fear comes down. This is why in almost every culture people have noticed the same thing for thousands of years. Morning is wiser than evening. The thing that felt unbearable last night is somehow smaller in the morning. Not gone, not solved, but manageable. The shape of it has changed. Walker and his colleagues tested this directly. They showed people emotionally charged images, then measured their emotional reaction. Then they tested the same people 12 hours later. Half the group had stayed awake during those 12 hours. Half had slept. The awake group reacted to the images with the same intensity. The emotional weight had not changed. The sleep group reacted less. The images were still recognized. The memories were intact. But the emotional response had dropped. And here is the key. The reduction only happened in people who had normal REM sleep. If REM was disrupted, the emotional weight did not come down, even after a full night in bed. The dream is the therapy. Without it, the memory and the pain stay welded together. This has a direct, terrible application. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a condition in which the brain cannot let go of a traumatic memory. The memory comes back again and again with the same intensity it had at the moment of the trauma. The charge will not come off. The brain replays the event, and every replay feels like the event itself, not a memory of it. People with PTSD have disrupted REM sleep. They wake from nightmares that drop them back into the trauma. They cannot stay in the dream state long enough for the chemistry to do its work. The brain is trying to do the job is failing. One leading theory is that the nightmares of PTSD are exactly that, failed attempts. The brain reaching for the same process that normally takes the edge off, but reaching with too much noradrenaline still in the system, so the replay happens at full emotional intensity instead of low. The wound is opened, it is not closed. If that is right, it means something difficult and important. The thing that makes you feel like yourself in the morning, after a hard night, after a fight, after bad news, is not toughness. It is not perspective. It is not willpower. It is a chemical process your brain ran while you were unconscious. And if that process gets interrupted, no amount of toughness will replace it. This is one of the reasons why people in crisis, people grieving, people in the middle of something terrible are often told to sleep, even when they don't think they can. It is not just rest, it is the only mechanism your brain has for converting raw pain into something you can carry. REM sleep does this every night, on every emotion, large and small. The argument with a co-worker, the embarrassing thing you said 5 years ago that still flashes through your head, the look on someone's face. The brain works on them, in the dark, while you sleep. Some get filed away with less weight. Some are connected to other memories that put them in a new context. Some, the brain decides, are no longer worth a strong reaction at all. You wake up and yesterday weighs slightly less than it did when you closed your eyes. But REM sleep is doing something else too, something that has nothing to do with emotion, at least not directly. And this is where the story takes a turn that, when scientists first noticed it, they could barely believe. The German neuroscientist Ulrich Wagner ran a series of experiments in which he gave subjects mathematical problems. The problems looked tedious, long sequences of numbers, each one transformed by a set of simple rules. To get the answer, you applied the rules step by step. Most people solve them this way, slowly, methodically, by brute force. But the problems had a hidden trick, a shortcut, a pattern that, if you noticed it, let you skip most of the work and arrive at the answer almost instantly. Wagner did not tell his subjects about the shortcut. He just gave them the problems, let them work, and then sent them away. Some of the subjects came back after a normal night of sleep. Others came back after the same number of hours, but awake. The sleep group discovered the hidden shortcut 3 times more often than the awake group. 3 times more often, not slightly, not within margin of error, 3 times. They had spent the night doing nothing by their own account. They had no conscious awareness of working on the problem. They had not thought about it. They had slept. And in the morning, the answer was there. The brain in REM sleep, it turns out, does something that does not happen anywhere else. It connects things that, during the day, are kept apart. The networks of the brain, during waking hours, operate along well-worn paths. The cheapest, fastest, most familiar routes. You see a problem in category A, your brain looks for solutions in category A. This is efficient. It is also limiting. Most of what your brain knows about category C is sitting right there, unused, because no path connects it to A. In REM sleep, those constraints loosen. The brain begins firing across categories. Memories from one part of life touch memories from another part. Ideas from one field touch ideas from another. Most of these connections are nonsense. Most are noise. That is why dreams are so often bizarre. A childhood teacher in your current kitchen. A conversation with a person who has been dead for 10 years. A street that does not exist. But every once in a while, a connection is not noise. Every once in a while, 2 things that should never have met meet, and the meeting solves something. In 1865, the German chemist August Kekulé was trying to figure out the structure of the benzene molecule. The chemistry of the time could not make it work. The molecule had 6 carbons. No arrangement in a straight line accounted for its behavior. Kekulé fell asleep in a chair by the fire, and in his sleep he saw a snake biting its own tail. He woke up and understood that benzene was a ring. Dmitri Mendeleev said he saw the periodic table in a dream, the elements arranged in rows and columns falling into place. He woke up and wrote it down. The version he wrote that morning was, in its essentials, the version we still use. Paul McCartney woke up one morning with the melody for Yesterday fully formed in his head. He spent weeks asking other musicians whether they recognized it, whether it was someone else's song he had heard somewhere and unconsciously remembered. It wasn't. The melody had simply arrived overnight. These stories sound almost too neat. They have been polished by retelling. But the mechanism behind them is real, and it has been documented. The brain in REM sleep is not just processing the day. It is doing something the waking brain is structurally unable to do. It is reaching across the maps and making connections that the daytime brain, locked into its efficient routes, would never make. Most of those connections are useless. Some of them change the world. Either way, every night the brain spends hours in this state, connecting things, stripping pain off memories, doing work that has no equivalent during the day. And we still haven't gotten to the most surprising discovery, the one that came less than 15 years ago, the one that, finally, explains why sleep deprivation kills so fast and why what you do at night may quietly decide what kind of brain you have at 70. It has to do with garbage. The brain, like every other organ in your body, produces waste. Every time a neuron fires, it leaves behind broken pieces, proteins that have served their purpose, molecules that need to be cleared away, metabolic debris, the kind of byproduct any working machine generates when it works. But the brain has a problem the rest of the body doesn't have. Every other organ has a drainage system built into it, the lymphatic system. a network of vessels that runs through your tissues, collects waste, and dumps it into the bloodstream, where the liver processes it and breaks it down. Your legs have it, your arms have it, your organs have it. The brain doesn't, or so anatomists believed for over 100 years. The brain sat inside the skull, sealed off from the rest of the body by the blood-brain barrier, with no apparent drainage of its own. Which raised a question almost no one bothered to ask. If the brain has no drainage, where does all the waste go? For most of the 20th century, the answer was a shrug. It got cleared somehow. The details were murky. Whatever the brain was doing with its trash, it seemed to be doing it. Among the things the brain produces, one stands out. A protein called beta amyloid. In small amounts, it is a normal byproduct of neural activity. In larger amounts, it does something terrible. It clumps. It sticks to itself, then to more of itself, building up into plaques that wedge themselves between neurons and block the signals running between them. Beta amyloid plaques are the defining physical marker of Alzheimer's disease. Inside the brain of an Alzheimer's patient, after death, the plaques are everywhere. They are the wreckage. The slow accumulation of them over decades is now believed to be one of the central engines of the disease. And here is the strange thing. Everyone makes beta amyloid. Everyone. It is being produced inside your skull right now while you read this. In a healthy brain, it is being cleared at roughly the same rate it is being made. The balance holds. The plaques don't form. In some people, the balance tips. The protein builds faster than it is removed. The plaques start to accumulate. The slow march toward dementia begins, often 20 or 30 years before the first symptom appears. For a long time, no one knew why the balance tipped in some people and not others, and no one connected the question to sleep. Then, in 2013, a neuroscientist named Nedergaard at the University of Rochester published a paper that rewrote a chapter of neuroscience. She and her team had discovered a system no one knew existed. She called it the glymphatic system. Glymphatic because it works like the lymphatic system, but it runs through glial cells. Glial cells are the other cells in the brain, the ones that aren't neurons. There are roughly as many of them as there are neurons, and for most of the history of neuroscience they were dismissed as packing material, glue, filler, the boring background to the interesting neurons doing the actual work. Nedergaard's team found that one type of glial cell, the astrocyte, forms small tubes around the blood vessels of the brain. These tubes carry cerebrospinal fluid, the clear liquid that bathes the brain and spinal cord. And during certain conditions, those tubes act like a flushing system. Fluid is pushed through them into the brain tissue, between the cells, picking up waste as it goes. It collects beta amyloid. It collects another protein called tau. It collects the metabolic garbage of a day's neural activity. Then it carries everything out, into the bloodstream, off to the liver, where it gets broken down and destroyed. The brain does have a drainage system. It just took 150 years to find it. But Nedergaard's discovery had a second part, and it is the part that matters here. The flushing only happens at full strength during sleep. When you are awake, the brain cells, including the astrocytes, are packed tightly together. There is barely any space between them. The fluid cannot flow. The cleaning system is almost entirely off. When you fall asleep, the astrocytes shrink. The space between the cells of the brain expands by almost 60%. Through that open space, cerebrospinal fluid begins to flow 10 times more powerfully than during the day. It floods through the brain like a tide. It washes the day's waste out, neuron by neuron, region by region, hour by hour, for as long as you are asleep. Imagine a city. During the day, the streets are full. Cars, people, deliveries, all moving, all working. There is no room to clean. Garbage piles up at the curb. At night, when the street's empty, the cleaning crews come in. The water trucks, the collectors. They sweep the city clean before morning, and by the time the workers come back, the streets are usable again. Your brain is doing this every night while you sleep. It cannot do it while you are awake. The brain cannot run at full operation and run the cleaning crews at the same time. The space the cleaning needs to happen is the same space the neurons need to communicate. So evolution did what evolution does. It separated the two processes in time. Day for working, night for cleaning. And now the question becomes obvious. What happens if you don't sleep enough? After Nedergaard's paper, several research groups ran the test. They restricted sleep in healthy people. They measured beta-amyloid levels in the brain. One night of poor sleep, just one, already produced a measurable rise in beta-amyloid in key regions, including the regions that are first affected in Alzheimer's disease. One night. Now ask what happens when one night becomes 100, 1,000, a lifetime of 5 and 6 hour nights. The studies are still being done. The connection is not absolute. Alzheimer's is a complex disease with many contributing factors, and not everyone who sleeps poorly will develop it. But the statistical signal is clear and growing. People with chronic sleep disruption have a significantly higher risk of developing the disease, and the build-up of the protein begins 20, 30 years before any symptom is visible. Which means the way you sleep in your 40s may be quietly deciding whether you recognize your own children at 70. This is the discovery that, more than any other, answered the oldest question: why do we sleep? Because the brain is doing maintenance that cannot happen any other way. Because the cost of not doing it is not tiredness. The cost is the slow accumulation of damage that, given enough time, takes away who you are. And it explains too why short-term sleep deprivation feels the way it feels. The pressure that builds when you stay awake too long is not just exhaustion. It is the brain holding waste it cannot clear, signals it cannot process, memories it cannot file. When you finally sleep, the pressure goes down because the work finally gets done. When you don't sleep, the work doesn't get done. It just keeps not getting done. The bill keeps growing. Which brings us back to Randy Gardner, the 17-year-old who, by day 11, could not subtract 7 from 100. He recovered. He slept for 14 hours straight after the experiment ended, then went back to a normal life. For a long time, his case was used as evidence that the human brain can take enormous sleep deprivation and bounce back without lasting damage. The brain forgets, the body forgives, and the system resets. We now know it isn't quite that simple. Later in life, Gardner reported significant insomnia, mood problems, and difficulties he traced back to that period. Whether any of that was caused by the 11 days is impossible to prove, but the cleaner picture has darkened. Sleep debt may not be paid off as completely as it once seemed. The body recovers, something else may not. And in animals taken further than any human has ever been pushed, the picture is much worse. In the experiments that followed Manasseh, rats kept fully sleepless died in 2 to 3 weeks. The damage was systemic: ulcers in the gut, failing organs, the immune system collapsing to the point that the bacteria in their own intestines crossed into the bloodstream and began attacking them from inside. They were not killed by anything outside themselves. They were killed by their own bodies, finally unable to maintain the difference between self and threat. Without sleep, the body literally eats itself. So now we have all of it: the memory work, the emotional repair, the connection making, the garbage collection. Each one, by itself, would be enough to make sleep worth the cost. Together, they explain the cost. Sleep is not one thing. It is not the lamp going out. It is not the body resting. It is not the brain shutting down. It is a state in which the brain switches modes every night to perform several completely different jobs, none of which can be done while you are awake, all of which are necessary, all of which have been refined over hundreds of millions of years to run on the same nightly schedule. And the reason no single theory has ever fully explained why we sleep is that there isn't one reason. There are layers, and each layer was added by evolution at a different time for a different problem on top of the layer that came before. Which is what the next part of the story is about. Because once you see sleep this way, as a stack, not a single function, the deepest question about it changes. The question stops being, why do we sleep? The question becomes, how old is it? And the answer, when scientists finally found it, was older than they ever expected. When biologists started looking, they expected sleep to be a vertebrate thing, a mammal thing, maybe shared by birds, a feature that came along with complex brains, because what else would need this much overnight maintenance? They were wrong by hundreds of millions of years. In 2017, a neuroscientist at Stanford named Ravi Nath was studying a creature called Cassiopeia, a jellyfish. Cassiopeia has no brain. Not a small brain, no brain. Its nervous system is a diffuse net of nerve cells spread across its body, with no central processor anywhere in it. By every reasonable definition, it should not need to sleep, because it has nothing to do the sleeping with. Nath put Cassiopeia under continuous observation. He watched what it did over a full day and night cycle. The jellyfish slept. It became less active at predictable times. It stopped responding to small disturbances. It reacted more slowly to food. When he disturbed it during its rest period, it took longer to return to normal behavior than at other times. If he kept it from resting on one night, it rested more deeply the next. By every behavioral criterion neuroscience uses to define sleep, the jellyfish was sleeping. About 8 hours of it, mostly at night. Jellyfish have existed on Earth for over 600 million years, which means sleep is older than the brain. Sleep was happening in something before any animal on this planet had a nervous system complex enough to ask why. Whatever sleep is, it did not begin as memory consolidation, because there was no memory to consolidate. It did not begin as emotional processing, because there were no emotions. It did not begin as garbage collection for beta amyloid, because there were no neurons producing the protein. It began as something else. Something simpler. Something so basic that even an animal without a brain needs it. And the most likely answer, the one researchers have been circling for the last 10 years, is the answer Aristotle reached for and got wrong in the details, but right in the shape. Sleep began as a way for living things to stop. Just stop. Metabolic activity produces damage. Every chemical reaction in a living cell generates byproducts, some of which are corrosive. Free radicals, oxidized molecules, wear on the machinery. The faster you run, the more damage accumulates. The longer you run without pause, the worse it gets. 600 million years ago, when the first nervous systems were appearing in the oceans, a creature that could stop completely during the part of the day when it could not feed efficiently anyway, would suffer less damage than one that ran continuously. The pause would be cheap. Predators had not yet evolved into the night hunters they later became. Resources were limited at certain hours. Stopping cost almost nothing. Not stopping cost wear. Sleep was, at the beginning, a pause, an off switch, a way of letting the body's chemistry settle before starting up again. Then, as life got more complex, the pause got more useful. When animals developed nervous systems, the pause became an opportunity. While the body was already still, the nervous system could do small maintenance tasks it could not do while active. Then memory appeared, and the pause became a chance to file what had been learned. Then emotions appeared, and the pause became a chance to process what had been felt. Then large, complex brains appeared, generating beta amyloid in quantities that needed clearing, and the pause became the only window when the cleaning could happen. Each new function was added to the existing pause, layered on top, built into the same window of stillness that had existed since before any of these functions were needed. This is why no single theory of sleep ever works. No single theory ever works because sleep is not a single thing, it is a stack. The oldest layer is 600 million years old and shared with jellyfish. The newest layers are tens of millions of years old, refined in mammals, optimized in humans. They share the same 8-hour window not because evolution planned it that way, but because each new function inherited the schedule of the function below it. Once the pause existed, every new biological need that could happen during a pause moved into the pause. A village well at first is just a place to draw water. Then it becomes the place people meet in the morning. Then it becomes the center of the square. Then it becomes the reference point for the whole village. The original function never goes away, but what the well means and what happens around it grows for centuries until you can no longer describe it with the word water. Sleep is the same. Started as a pause. Ended as the most complex regulatory process in biology. That is the answer. That is what was waiting underneath the question. Not a single purpose, but a 600 million year accumulation of purposes, each one too important to lose, each one preserved by the same evolutionary force that ruthlessly cut anything unnecessary. Sleep is everywhere because, layer by layer, it became everything. Which means the original question we asked at the beginning has a different answer than it sounded like it would. If sleep isn't rest, what is it? It is the other half of being alive. There are two states in which a living thing exists. The state in which it interacts with the world, takes in information, acts, eats, fights, builds. And the state in which it processes what it took in, repairs what got damaged, files what is worth keeping, releases what is not, and prepares to do it all again. Neither state is more real than the other. Neither is downtime for the other. They are two different operations of the same continuous life. Most of human civilization was built by people who believed they only existed in one of those states, the waking one. The other one was a blank. It was never a blank. It was the part where everything important got organized. And we are only now, in the last few decades, beginning to see what happens when a species starts cutting that half short on a planetary scale. In the middle of the 20th century, the average adult slept about 8 hours a night. Today, in most developed countries, the number is closer to 6.5. An hour and a half lost, every night, almost everywhere, in roughly 70 years. That hour and a half is not a small thing. It is, statistically, the most disrupted part of the night. It is the hour when the deepest slow-wave sleep is finishing its work and the longest REM cycles are beginning. The hour you lose when you go to bed too late or when an alarm pulls you out too early is the hour the brain needed most. The effects, at population scale, are now visible in the data. People who chronically sleep less than 6 hours a night have a significantly higher risk of type 2 diabetes because sleep regulates insulin sensitivity and glucose handling, and the regulation breaks down without it. They have higher rates of cardiovascular disease because sleep is when blood pressure resets and inflammation in the vessel walls is contained. They get sick more often because the immune system uses sleep to produce and deploy the cells that fight off infection. In one study at Carnegie Mellon, people who slept less than 6 hours a night caught colds at almost 5 times the rate of people who slept 7 or more. Same exposure, same virus, 5 times the rate of infection. Because the immune system without sleep runs at a fraction of its capacity. A meta-analysis combining data from more than 1.5 million people found a clear connection between short sleep and earlier death. Not through a single disease, through a general statistical shift in lifespan. People who consistently sleep less die earlier across causes. Matthew Walker has put it as bluntly as it can be put. There is not a single aspect of physical health, mental well-being, or cognitive function that is not improved by sleep and damaged by its absence. Not one. This is not a wellness slogan. It is the conclusion of decades of research, formulated by a researcher who has spent his career trying to find a single counterexample. He has not found one. Nobody has. And against this, the culture has gone the other way. Sleeping little is treated as a marker of seriousness, of dedication, of toughness. People publicly take pride in sleeping 4 hours. The boast does not name what it actually is, which is the slow erosion of the system that makes everything else they are proud of possible: the career, the thinking, the relationships, the body that carries them. All of it is built each night in the hours they are cutting short. The science is telling us something the culture has not yet absorbed. You cannot have the daytime self you want if you keep destroying the nighttime self that builds it. And here, finally, the picture turns back to where it started. Because if you understand sleep now, you cannot look at Randy Gardner the same way. He was a teenager who wanted to break a record. He sat in a room and fought for 11 days to keep his eyes from closing. He thought he was testing his willpower. He thought the thing he was fighting against was weakness. He was not fighting weakness. He was fighting 600 million years. He was fighting a system older than the brain that was trying to fight it. A system that began in jellyfish before there were eyes to close, and that, by the time it reached a 17-year-old in San Diego, had spent the entire history of animal life on Earth being refined into the most essential nightly process a living thing performs. He couldn't beat it. Nobody can. The longer he tried, the more of him came undone. His memory dissolved. His vision broke. His ability to hold a sentence together failed. By the end, he could not subtract a single number from another single number, because the part of him that does subtraction had nowhere to file the question. He thought he was keeping his eyes open. What he was actually doing was refusing, hour after hour, the only process that puts a human being back together. We spend our lives, most of us, trying to do a smaller version of the same thing, staying up a little later, cutting a little off the front of the night, pushing the alarm a little earlier, treating sleep as the thing we give up first when there is something we want more. And the thing we are giving up every time is not nothing. It is the half of life in which we become ourselves again, the half in which the day is sorted, the pain is taken down, the memories are filed, the connections are made, the garbage is washed out, the body is repaired. The brain is prepared for tomorrow by a process so old that even a creature without a brain knows how to do it. You will spend roughly 30 years of your life with your eyes closed. It is not lost time. It is the time that makes everything else possible. If this changed the way you look at your own pillow tonight, leave a like. It is the best way to tell us that subjects like this matter to you. Subscribe if you want more videos that take something you do every day and follow it all the way down to where it actually comes from. And tell us in the comments how many hours of sleep you got last night. We are honestly curious, especially after watching this.